Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the decision meeting for the Community Safety Portfolio of Services at Portsmouth City Council. I'm the decision maker, and my name is Councillor Lee Hunt. And we'll just go around the room at the moment. We'll start with Councillor Corkery, so he can introduce himself and tell everybody what he does in the meeting.
Councillor Cal Corkery, I represent Charles Dickens Ward and opposition spokesperson for community safety.
I'm Colette Hill, I'm Assistant Director for Neighbourhoods.
Roy Goulding, Community Safety Manager.
Jane Dodino, Local Democracy Officer.
Richard Lee, Regulatory Services Manager.
Steve Bell, Regulatory Services Team Leader.
The closer you hold the microphone to your mouth, the more opportunity I've got of actually hearing what you say. Okay, so Councillor, for the record, Councillor Gemma New sent her apologies, but she's also sent a message to us all to say she's happy with all of the reports. And Ed Skinner is going to do the scams report. Mr. Lee, Richard Lee, is going to do the shellfish report. Steve Bell is doing the health and safety report. And Roy Goulding is going to do the community wardens report. Okay, so let's get on with it, shall we? So if we move to the first report, which is agenda item 3, about community safety, about the community wardens, and we've already seen a very nice report in the newspaper this morning. Thank you very much indeed for that lovely write-up. Roy, do you want to go through the report and tell people what we're going to do?
Okay. This is a report that's proposing retention of additional community wardens until the 31st of March 2021. So the recommendation for the Cabinet is, or for the meeting today, is approval to retain these 8 additional community wardens is made. So the background is that previously there was a commitment by the administration for enhancing the current community warden team. So we've already got a team of 8 permanent community wardens, and from January 2019 the council employed an additional 8 wardens who are currently funded until the end of this financial year. The team's work is to help keep the city safe, clean and tidy and provide support and advice when needed. So the additional costs to continue this for a further year is around £320,000 per annum, which is made up of staffing cost and uniforms and vehicles, etc. And it's funded. It's been funded from the housing revenue account, community safety reserves, and the flexible supported housing grant. I'll go on to where we're looking at the funding for if we were to continue it, but that's for this current year. The team, again, we've enhanced the team with the additional wardens because our hours of a duty are from 8 a.m. in the morning, and with the original team it's from 10 a.m. Until 10 p.m. This team also worked till 2 a.m. And 10 a.m. till 2 a.m. at the weekends. We carry out duties across the city, and in the evenings we've been able to add targeted patrols at some of the housing blocks where there was ASB being suffered. So there's some details there about some high street wardens in April 2018. I won't go in detail here unless there's any questions. But what I'll do, in terms of the impact of the additional resources, there is an appendix at the back where it identifies the number of demands that they've got, and that's remained consistent in terms of if you break down to the individual wardens. I'll go back onto that. We're able to provide more visibility and reassurance and be more proactive with our patrolling in identified hotspots and in particular, the additional targeted sort of work is around high streets during the earlier morning period, and as you say, the council housing blocks during the evening. So the proposal is, as you say, to retain the current team of 8 that we've got until March 2021. Just 3 days a year that the guys aren't on duty, and it's to continue to keep the city safe, clean and tidy. So again, the additional cost, if we could carry it on for another year, is £320,000. Again, the housing revenue account has identified the funding to allow their contribution to continue. Community Safety Reserve, again, we've managed to have agreement that that's there to fund that if we agree to carry it on. The Flexible Homeless Support Grant has been confirmed, but at the moment the budget for that has still been worked out. But what we're happy with is with the reserves and the HRA funding, we could carry that. There is the money there for it to continue for a further year. And again, similar to this year, if we would be looking to bring a report back around October 2020 to update where we are with that and how we want to continue. So the reasons for the recommendations, as I said before, we've got that additional cover from 8 a.m. to 2 a.m, which is not possible with a team of 8. We have made progress to resolve reduce issues impacting on residents, the community and businesses, and we've increased the amount of actionable work that they're able to do, as well as carrying out the additional patrols, providing visibility and reassurance. There is an integrated impact assessment attached, and there's a reference there to legal, and it's really the legal implications around the costs and the funding there. So, go over. There's a further breakdown on the funding there again, and if there's any questions, I'm happy that I've described where the money's coming from. And we can only, as you say, currently we could only commit to continuing this until the 31st of March 2020 because of the way that the budget currently is. So confirmation again that we'll be looking to bring, if this is approved, we'll look to bring a report back in October 2020.
Michelle, is there anything you'd like to add?
No, I think we've covered it all.
Two questions and then some observations if I can.
Can I just beg you to bring the mic a little bit more forward and...
What, papers in a way? Is that better?
That's it, much better.
Cool. So first, just a kind of general question for information really is whether this is a service that other local authorities provide, whether we've got any kind of understanding of other comparative local authorities, have they got similar services or do they do things slightly differently? I know it's a bit of a left field question, but if we know that.
When they were first introduced as neighbourhood wardens, there was government funding, and they probably were across the country. With all austerity and changes and it being sort of back down to the local authority to provide the funding for it, a number of authorities have probably not got community wardens or neighbourhood wardens as they were. Some have done done a bit of a merger in terms of the police community support officers. There are, I think Hampshire have got accredited officers there called EXOs. So there are similar schemes that are running, but I think a lot of authorities a bit like ours is less than what it was when we started.
Okay, thank you. That's useful. Yeah, because I think it kind of feeds into the general point I wanted to make about the important role that they play in the community, and I think it's good on the council really for continuing to provide that service at the kind of extended level compared to what had been pared back to at one point, particularly the wards that I represent. I know probably takes up, I'd imagine, a bulk, if not a significant part of their work, the estates around kind of Charles Dickens wards in terms of antisocial behaviour. When we get feedback from residents that is often in the top kind of 2 or 3 issues that they're experiencing in their community. So it's always a case of asking to report things through to the police, but we know as stretched police resources are, to have that additional resource that reports can be made through to, and then kind of response can be put in place in terms of regular patrols of blocks and estates is something that I know that the community is really grateful for, and I think it's a really important role to be played. Also in terms of the kind of staffing that I think we've got, I think I've been quite impressed, to be honest, about the level of community engagement. I've been at quite a few different community events or resident association meetings or that kind of stuff, where the community warden's been able to come along and play quite a positive role there in terms of picking up information from the community and representing the council. It's just another question, I guess, around employment. So I know I've made the point kind of a number of times around the fact that we're currently on a model of going year to year on funding, and that has an impact, I think, on 8 members of staff who are on fixed term contracts, and the impact that potentially has on them and their lives in terms of not being able to kind of put down roots and not knowing year to year if they've got that continued employment. So a question that's just occurred to me is that the funding that has been identified, the HRA and the general funds are not necessarily time limited. It's the flexible homelessness support grant that is time limited in year to year. Is that correct?
It's general fund reserve, so there's no general fund revenue funding for it. So as we understand it, that can't necessarily carry on the reserve. The HRA. I do agree that we can have that conversation with the HRA, but it would require us to only employ 4 of them on a permanent contract, and there may be changes we'd need to make to the shift pattern to do that. So it's certainly something we're very aware of and conscious of from the team's point of view, and we are working to try and resolve it and secure a longer term funding position.
So my understanding currently is that there are 8 permanent members of staff and 8 fixed-term contracts. Is that correct?
That's correct, yeah.
But with the funding model we could potentially look at, quick maths, 12 permanent contracts, which gives 4 members of staff a bit more security about their finances and employment. We
can certainly take that to the housing revenue account decision maker. Yeah, that's something we could look at. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, just to kind of summarise, I think it's a really important service. I'm glad to see that the finances have been put in place for a further year, but I'd hope to kind of work with the administration going forward to try and find longer term funding solutions to ensure that it's there for the future.
Okay, thank you. So a couple of things then. We never really know what the government's going to give us from one year to the next. So it's very difficult to plan ahead, even though they say that we should. So it is very difficult to say we're going to be in such and such a position in this time next year. But I can assure you that so long as I'm the community safety lead, I'll be looking to maintain the service as it is now. So that's why I brought the report, as you recognised, nearly a year ago now. That was the first report that we brought to this portfolio. And I'm enormously grateful for Councillor Darren Sanders and James Hill for working with us to provide the money from the housing revenue account. So we've got to thank them as well. And that shows how we work within the Cabinet and cross-portfolio in order to deliver services citywide. And of course, these community wardens, they are brilliant, as I said in the newspaper today. But we've always got to remember we've got housing officers as well, and the enforcement teams around clean streets, and the regulatory services. And of course, the community wards are not a statutory service, so the money we spend on them has to come out of other resources. But I think over in Fareham, Roy, they were looking at employing private security guards. Certainly I did hear that fairly recently, and I don't know whether they've gone ahead and done that, but that's not something that I think any of us would welcome. Well, some may, but certainly not something that I'm sure you wouldn't welcome here. So we shall continue to fight for the community wardens, and as a public accountable service here in Portsmouth, serving the public in the good way that they do. Nobody's got anything else to add. I'm very pleased to approve the recommendations. Okay. Item 4 is the health and safety plan, and we are pleased to have Steve Bell here with us. And Steve, you're going to present the report. It's a very long, detailed report, so we've all read it. Cal's read it quite a few times. I've seen it several times. So if you'd like to give us a synopsis of it, we'd be very grateful. And hold the mic close to your mouth. Can you guys hear at the back all right?
Thank you, Councillor Hunt. Good afternoon. I have prepared a shorter synopsis of the plan, but just to summarise, obviously the purpose of the report is an expression of Portsmouth City Council's commitment to health and safety, the health and safety role, responsibilities, and to develop a health and safety operating plan. The recommendation is that the Cabinet Member for Community Safety approves the manner in which the Regulatory Services proposes to deliver its health and safety responsibilities for the period 2019 to 2022 as set out in the plan. The overall aim of the service is to work with others to protect people's health and safety by ensuring risks in the changing workplace are managed properly. Health and safety is a statutory function. The duty is placed on the local authority by Section 18 of the Health and Safety at Work Act 1974. We are, however, mindful of central government's views on health and safety and the National Local Authority Enforcement Code, which requires us to take a more consistent and proportionate approach to enforcement. The primary responsibility for managing health and safety risks lies with businesses who actually create the risk. Local authority health and safety regulators have an important role ensuring the effective and proportionate management of risks, supporting businesses, protecting the community, and contributing to a wider public health agenda. Our service will continue, hopefully, to use the full range of regulatory interventions available to influence behaviours and the management of risks with proactive inspections, but only for premises with higher risks or where intelligence suggests that risks are not being effectively managed. It appears that the government expectation is that business operating in comparative lower risk premises should not be subject to proactive unannounced inspections unless there is reason to suspect poor performance. Our key service drivers are to work with the Health and Safety Executive, respond to and investigate accidents, dangerous occurrences and diseases reported to the Council, RIDDORS, which is the reporting of injuries, diseases and dangerous occurrences, investigate complaints, details about lifting equipment notifications where that they are faulty and that we need to check that these businesses have actually effected the necessary repairs. Asbestos notifications for asbestos work. We also regulate electrolysis, acupuncture, cosmetic piercing and tattooing registration and licensing. All in all a small part of the service but with a big impact. The national enforcement priorities, we believe that we link into number 1, which is to support economic growth, especially in small businesses, by ensuring a level playing field, and number 4, which helps people to live a healthier life by preventing ill health and harm. Our local priorities are where we would deal with matters of evident concern, which are found by our officers regularly conducting food inspections in local businesses where they find a potential to cause harm or injury. Interventions are all to be recorded on our service database. We would like to adopt a common sense approach to manage the real risks, but not encouraging people to be risk averse. We will also continue to maintain the tattoo health rating scheme, which all the tattooists in the city have signed up to, which is similar to the food hygiene rating scheme. The service analysis, which is on page 12 of the plan, as can be seen, the figures are relatively small but the impact can be great. I've personally dealt with 2 fatalities in recent years. We're also represented on the South East Health and Safety Advisory Group, the HESAG, which comprises 17 local authorities. The panel shares knowledge and good practice across the region. The service is also represented on the Hampshire and Isle of Wight Environmental Health Chief Officers Group, where the above is undertaken at a strategic level. And finally, to close, the resources currently available to regulatory services to deliver its health and safety responsibilities are considered to be below those necessary to deliver the full range of functions and tasks as set out within this operating plan. That's all I have, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah, thank you very much. Councillor Corkery.
Thank you. Section 8 talks about local priorities. I know you mentioned about having intelligence-led inspections. I think you referenced the food industry in particular. Is that the primary local priority, or are there other industries that are of particular concern or seen a priority in terms of health and safety?
I think food is a big part of our enforcement remit, and our officers have a government remit by the Food Standards Agency to regularly visit these premises. So I think that is where we are finding sort of the matters of evident concern. But I believe that overall there are probably at least 5,000, 10,000 plus businesses in the city. We are kept informed by the RIDDLE database of issues, but that's obviously after the incidents have happened. But we also get notifications by engineers that inspect lifting equipment to make sure, in industrial premises, to make sure that that's safe. But it is, to be honest with you, Councillor, a matter of trying to cover all the bases.
Okay, thank you. I haven't got any further questions. I'm happy to note the report.
So, very important service for all those people avidly watching on the telly right now. But for everybody going out at night time, as you say, to eat food in local food premises, as I do, I enjoy that. And sometimes you put them right, and sometimes you haul them up, and sometimes you give them advice. And I, for one, I know my other half is here today, we enjoy going out and eating locally, and we feel reassured by the approach that you all have to this service. I don't intend to get a tattoo, but I do know sometimes it goes wrong, so it's got to be watched out for. And of course, health and safety at work is very important. As you mentioned, you dealt with 2 fatalities. I think that the other thing to tease out, which we haven't teased out, is that we don't investigate ourselves, so the City Council wouldn't investigate itself. So we would, presumably the Health and Safety Executive will come in if there's an issue around work-related matters. Do we do our own food, though? Do we look at our own food?
That is an interesting question, Councillor. It's a bit of an awkward situation. The Code of Practice says that we should inform the Chief Executive if we have an issue. We do inspect our own food premises, including the 5th floor restaurant. But we are told if ever we do find an issue that we are supposed to notify the Chief Executive, and our contingency plan is that if there was something that required enforcement action, we would probably need to call in a neighbouring authority to undertake that for us. But it's never been done, to my knowledge.
Well, that's good news, I suppose. Well, anyway, thank you very much, as I say, for all the good work that you all do, keeping the public out there safe at work and when they're out enjoying themselves. And so I'm pleased to approve the recommendations. Thank you very much for all you do. So in a similar sort of vein, we move quickly to Mr. Skinner, who's going to tell us about scams, and I know there are some people who are interested in the audience. So Ed, would you like to tell us what we do about scams here and all the good work that you're doing and the way we hope to expand the good work that you're doing?
Yes, thank you, Councillor. This report's titled Scams, a Plan of Action 2019 to 2022. That's because we're quite ambitious about expanding our work on scams. The report essentially describes a preventative work stream which seeks to safeguard the elderly, the vulnerable from scams, or sometimes called mass marketing fraud. To run you through the report in a logical fashion as far as I see it, paragraph 3 sets out what we mean by scams or mass marketing fraud, and in that we mean fraud by letter, email, telephone, advert and so on, and essentially giving false promises in order to con victims out of money. It also sets out an overview of the pervasive nature of scams and the harm they cause to society, and that can be found sort of paragraphs 3.4 onwards really. Paragraphs 3.7 and 3.8, they identify the National Trading Standards Scams team. Now, the reason why they've been brought into the report is because they lead on this work stream nationally, and they receive funding from central government, but they need local services in order to, as boots on the ground, to actually deliver the work. So it's very important for us to describe in this report how we interact with National Trading Standards, and they're referred to throughout the report as NTS Scams Team. Paragraph 5 of the report sets out the Portsmouth context. So if we just turn to page 4, the Portsmouth context in terms of victims or potential victims. So NTS, essentially, their scams team, with the work they do with their partners nationally and internationally, they identify people who they believe are either vulnerable to scams or have actually been victim of scams in our postcode areas, and they send us that information on a periodical basis, or as much as we can deal with. So paragraph 5 sort of sets out the Portsmouth data, and at the time of writing, we had identified, and bear in mind we'd only just started this work sort of the early part of 2019. We've been sent, at the time of writing, we were sent 682 potential victims of scams and fraud in Portsmouth area, and of that we've managed to support 92 of them, I believe, and that's 92 interventions that the Trading Standards team within Regulatory Services have been able to contact. Paragraph 5 all sets out the like a published methodology, if you will, to forecast the potential population increase over time. That's at 5.2 and 5.3. We can see that at the moment, as of 2018, there were roughly 215,700 people estimated being in Portsmouth. The research suggests that 14.1% of those people are over 65, and the research also suggests that those people are going to be very, very likely to be targeted by the criminals that conduct these scams. An increase by 2030 puts the statistics at 227,000, thereby 17% of Portsmouth residents will be over 65, and Age UK state that 53% of those people will be targeted by scams or fraud by that date. So by that date, we could have over 20,000 people in Portsmouth which could be being actively targeted by these scams, businesses, or the criminals. Paragraph 4, to put it on a statutory basis, we set out why we should consider getting involved with this work, and why it's our remit within Trading Standards and Regulatory Services to seek to mitigate or negate the harm. So if we just turn to paragraph 6, it sets out, not paragraph 6, apologies, paragraph 4, sets out our statutory functions. So the Consumer Protection from Unfair Trading Regulations 2008, or more fondly known as the CPRs, they describe deceptive or misleading commercial practices which are synonymous with scams and mass marketing fraud. So we say that we have a statutory duty to undertake this work within Regulatory Services, but wider throughout the Council, we would also say that Portsmouth City Council has a statutory duty under the Care Act 2014, which sets out that the authority has a duty to protect residents from financial abuse, and that's published quite specifically in the guidance that accompanies that legislation and names trading standards as a valuable partner in that work. Moving on, paragraph 6, that sets out what we believe in a very, very brief summary of our intervention plan. So what we actually are going to do. So we'll take monthly referrals from national trading standards, and we'll seek to make contact with the victims that they've identified and make the appropriate interventions there. As a service, we'll work with our partners in adult social care, the safeguarding teams, the MASH, multi-agency safeguarding hub, police, wardens, and the voluntary sector in order to basically confirm or assist those that have been either identified as scams victims or those that are at risk. The other part of this work is very educational, so it's not actually going out and visiting these people and making interventions. It's very much about education. So in paragraph 6.5, we talk about the Friends Against Scam initiative, which is again a national trading standards product, but it's been rolled out across the country. It's taken up not only by councils and its partners, but also in big business. So if you walked in, for instance, you walked into NatWest Bank, you'll see all over their stationery the Friends Against Scams stationery, and it's really about education. It's an education. The ethos is about us speaking to the people that are our nearest and dearest, having those awkward conversations about are you having unsolicited calls at the door? Are you taking unsolicited phone calls? Are you being targeted? It's about target hardening the people that are close to us in society, not only our friends and family, but wider. And that will blossom and make it much more difficult for those that are perpetrating these crimes to actually hook the victims and making them more chronic. Paragraph 7 presents some data on how we can achieve potential savings. So it's not the savings aren't just to the individuals that may be susceptible to the criminal activity in the sense of their losses money, and the loss to the impact on them socially. And their self-esteem, but we can also extrapolate using the research financial savings from this work as well. So if we take the data in paragraph 7, which is based on the work that Portsmouth has done to date, which is obviously only a small snapshot, using the methodology to work out, we can say that about 25% of the 52 victims at that particular point in time of writing, so 13.5% of victims. If we take those victims that are confirmed victims and we take the average cost of social care full-time, because these people are likely to end up in full-time care at the cost of the local authority once they've exhausted their life savings, we can extrapolate that just those 13.5 people have a potential savings of £502,000 a year to adult social care. Obviously, like I said, that figure has now gone up since the time of writing. We're now at 92 confirmed victims rather than 52. So you can almost double that number. Paragraph 8 refocuses on the prevention work in terms of the Friends Against Scams training. So like I said, we're going to go out and visit these scams victims once we become aware of them, but the other half of this project or this work stream is really to embed the Friends Against Scams initiative and the training within Portsmouth City Council. The ambition is to make Portsmouth City Council a Friends Against Scams local authority, so that all staff is part of the mandatory training when they're inducted into the employment, and existing staff as well. It's essentially a 20-minute online course which is all about raising awareness and asking people to take a pledge away, and that pledge is to have that conversation with others, and from there the message will spread. A small aside to that is that incidentally we've managed to secure the Lord Mayor, thankfully, has accepted an invitation from us to be Portsmouth's first Scambassador. Now, the Scambassadors are, anyone can be a friend, but people who are Scambassadors, they are people with higher profile influence, and they take away from that a promise to use their influence to promote the Friends Against Scams message and encourage other senior officials to do so as well. So that's really the report and the work that we seek to achieve over the next 3 years in a very, very quick whistle-top tour. So I really just ask you to endorse the report and approve the recommendations as set out in paragraph 2. And I can confirm the report has received finance and legal approval, and a integrated impact assessment has been completed as well. So if there's any other questions.
So, a quick question, Mr. Lee, about the Proceeds of Crime Act. So we're looking to get more involved with that to create more income for the regulatory services. And you all, I think you all work together, don't you? You all together at different times. For example, you were doing night noise last night, Ed, and you've been also across to foreign countries in order to seize people's houses. I think that's right, isn't it?
There was one occasion when I was working for another local authority in one of their cases whereby we had to go to Spain to seize a villa from one of the criminals in that case. Yes, so that is not every week, but that is an extraordinary example. Yes.
So the more of these criminals we catch, Mr. Lee, and the more of their property that we seize, and they have to prove that it's not through ill-gotten gain, the more money we'll have to chase and prosecute these scammers and other people who behave badly. I think that's right, is it? Perhaps you'd like to touch on that a little bit.
That's it in a nutshell. The Proceeds of Crime Act enables us to do just as you've described, once, of course, the criminal's been convicted. So that's obviously the rub of it. We need to ensure that we've got the evidence which will secure a prosecution through the criminal justice system. Once that's being carried out, we can link the proceeds, literally the ill-gotten gains, through their criminality, and there is a process through the Proceeds of Crime Act which enables us to take a percentage of those ill-gotten gains.
So I figure we did, just tease this out a little bit, Councillor Corkery. I think it was £1.4 million that had been seized through work activity in this area, but we only ended up with 253,000 because the Treasury takes about half, or what were the proportions? Because I don't remember them entirely.
Sorry, Councillor, this was going to come up in my second report, but you've it all depends on which action you're taking. If it's what they call a confiscation investigation, and a confiscation order is made, then the Home Office sets out certain rules on how that money, let's call it £100,000 for the sake of argument, nice round figure, how that £100,000 is split up. So 50% would go to the Home Office and central government funds. The remaining 50% is split 3 ways amongst the agencies that are responsible for the action. So there's an investigative agency, there's a prosecution agency, and there's the enforcement courts that are responsible for enforcing the order. So if we bring that back within the context of Portsmouth City Council, we are both an investigative and a prosecution agency, so we have the potential from confiscation orders to claw back, for want of a better phrase, 37.5% of an order that was made. So £37,500 from a £100,000 order could then be reinvested back into the activity or reinvested into crime reduction strategies.
So £237,000 would equate to about 3 or 4 full-time equivalent posts in your services. Would that be about right?
It depends on the standing and the classification of the officer undertaking the work, but a Band 10 officer equates to around about £50,000. So that would be a principal regulatory services officer with some experience in the field, with qualifications, etc., with regard to financial investigations or trading standards or whatever the necessary prerequisite was for that particular role. So about £50,000 an officer.
And I think the point I'm trying to tease out is you're not siloed into noise officers, into officers investigating scams, but it is a regulatory service, and that you all support one another. There's a lot of, there's cross-pollination.
That's exactly right. There was an amalgamation of the traditional Environmental Health Service and Trading Standards Service and a couple of other services that we provide into regulatory services a couple of years ago. And that was the idea of that amalgamation, that we have experienced investigators who've got the foundation to do investigations pretty much in whatever criminal activity we want them to focus on. Of course, there are specialities, but there is a cross-pollination of their skill set, and there is a foundation that these are qualified, seasoned investigators.
So at the start, I mean, we start off how we're going to build this service, how we're going to go out and get more of these proceeds of crime. So hopefully we'll then get more staff to go after these scammers and make sure that if they come to Portsmouth, we will clamp down on them and catch them. And that's where we want to get to.
Thank you for the report, which I think was pretty informative and tells us about an important service that local authority provides, helping to protect vulnerable residents. I think it's a sensible suggestion to become a Friends Against Scams local authority, and that will hopefully raise awareness amongst staff of the issue, helping to protect people that are potentially at risk of becoming a victim to a scam. Obviously the council does provide quite a few services that are targeted at the age group that are particularly at risk, and particularly around sheltered housing and kind of supported living in care homes, and I guess a whole range of services within adult social care. So I think it's a sensible suggestion.
So I think that's right. So thank you, Councillor Corkery. You know, when people are in care homes, at least got the opportunity of having wardens and they're vulnerable and they're protected. So I think I mentioned the British Legion before, getting out to them and getting into these sorts of groups. And as you say, it's worrying because we know dementia is gripping our society. We talk about dementia and Alzheimer's a lot more nowadays, and these people at home, and I'm personally aware of how easy it is to scam someone at home because of their dementia or their illness or their mental welfare that they have a problem. So these 1 million friends by 2022 will become the front line against scammers. They'll be the front line, and then you guys will come along and hopefully go get them and prosecute them to the fullest ability of the council, and we will go after them and we will get them, and we will make them pay for what that they do. So I'm happy to very much to approve the report. So kind of having stolen your thunder, Ed, a little bit, we can go on to the next report, which is about the very interesting report about financial investigations and asset recovery. You can tell us about all your lovely trips abroad and going season people's houses and all the fun that you have whilst you do your work for this wonderful council.
Thank you, Councillor. If only that was the case. Unfortunately, it's more often than not spreadsheets and things like that, so it's not quite as salubrious. But no, this report is financial investigations and asset recovery, using the slogan "taking the cash out of crime," which is something that's not new that I've coined. It's a slogan that was used when this piece of legislation was first introduced back in 2002-2003. But again, we're looking at 2019 to 2022 because we're ambitious. We want to grow. We want to monitor our growth in this area over that 3 years. And the report. It's not a new report in the sense that this is a new work stream. There was a report brought to Cabinet back in 2010, I believe, when this work stream was introduced. So this report is really to update the work that was started back in 2010, and particularly seeks to highlight some of the successes that we've achieved with actually very, very little resource, but also summarise our ambitions going forward as well. So, paragraph 3 sets out the background or the history of how local authorities came to have the powers under the Proceeds of Crime Act 2002. Here on after I'll just refer to as POCA. And I won't bore you with the numerous paragraphs which sort of describe the various tools in the toolkit, if I can use that, the investigative powers that we have from this piece of legislation. But in brief, it's things like the ability to confiscate assets through court orders, the ability to confiscate money, and those orders are very much the result of a mathematical formula. A court will decide how much money a defendant has made from their criminal conduct, and it will then assess what the value of their realisable assets are, and it will make an order that person can actually afford to pay. It's very, very draconian in the sense that once they're convicted, it is so that the element of innocence or guilt is removed. We are past that stage. They are guilty of the crime that they've been convicted. The onus is on them then at that point to demonstrate to the court that their property, their assets didn't come from crime. So we are on the front foot from that point on, which is the reverse of where you are when you start a prosecution. So confiscation, it also gives you the powers of restraint, so that we have quite far-reaching powers in terms of being able to freeze people's bank accounts, for instance, when they're under investigation, freeze their assets. They're seizing cash, so if we go out and we do certain operations, I'll give you an example, we frequently go out targeting counterfeit and illicit tobacco traders in the city. We might, if we find cash that is linked with the counterfeit tobacco, we will seize that cash and we will have it forfeited in the magistrates' courts. And again, it's a civil process. It's another power we've got. The Act introduces new offences which weren't previously available to us. So money laundering offences, and that's set out in paragraph 7 of the report. A number of very, very powerful offences which focus a little bit more on the property that was obtained by the individual or the business, rather than actually what they did. So it's a completely different focus, and it adds a huge amount of power to us when we're trying to tackle criminality. So yes, again, I won't bore you, but 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8 really set the brief overview of the various powers, the capabilities available to us within the legislation, and therefore the potential deployment that the financial investigator, which is what the individual is, that's described as, or the accredited financial investigator within Portsmouth City Council, what they're able to do under certain circumstances throughout our investigations. All appropriate, all above board. There has to be certain criteria for us to be able to utilise these powers, and there are certain checks and balances. So whilst myself, as the financial investigator, might make an application to a court for an order, for instance, it doesn't just stop with me. It has to go through a certain checks and balances process. So there's another position called a senior appropriate officer. Actually, Richard, to my left, is actually currently the senior appropriate officer. So I would compose my application. It would then go to Richard, and he would decide whether it's justified, proportionate, legal, and necessary as an appropriate action going forward before it even goes to the court. So, of course, then a Crown Court judge would then decide ultimately whether it's right or not. Paragraph 10 of the report sets out something called the Asset Recovery Incentivisation Scheme, and that's what Councillor, you were referring to earlier about how when we actually achieve court orders and we get money back, that is the Home Office scheme, ARIS for short. Everything's got an acronym, isn't it? That's the scheme that was launched in 2006 and sets out how funds which are recovered by agencies like ourselves, how they're retained and how they must be used. So again, if we use that analogy of if we convict someone of a fraud, for instance, or a trading standards crime, and the court values their benefit from their criminality of £100,000, we have the ability to take back into service 37.5% of that order that we can then reinvest in the activity. So obviously it's very, very costly taking these actions, costly to prosecute someone, it's costly, and that has to come from we don't have the luxury of a Crown prosecution service like the police would. We would have to find those funds to prosecute that person. So we have to be very, very, very sure about what we do. So if we're able to claw back some of the money, reinvest it into our service to enable us to then take on the next case and then the next case, it's very, very appropriate for us to do so. Paragraph 11 gives you a very high-level overview of what Portsmouth City Council have achieved to date, and I set out that an approximately 0.5 FTE has been essentially the resource since 2010. That being me, and that being me not being able to devote my full-time attention on this work stream because I've always had other duties to attend to. So, but it sets out in 11.2 that it's estimated, I've estimated, going back since I started, that I've achieved £1.9 million worth of confiscation orders, and that's for cases working for Portsmouth City Council and for other authorities, because on occasion we have lent the resource to other local authorities that don't have a financial investigator embedded within their organisation. And from that 1.9 million recovered back into service, we've estimated since 2011-2012, £270,000 has been recovered for trading standards and now regulatory services, and that's been reinvested into the function, not only justifying my existence and being able to do what I do, but also enabling us to have confidence taking on the next criminal that we come across. Paragraph 11.4 sets out our aspirations for the future. I mentioned that we'd only had up until now 0.5% of an FTE. Over the next 3 years, where possible, we're going to expand and grow this capability. We've recently been able to employ a new member of staff who is a fully fledged confiscator like myself, and they are going to be, and we are training another within team, so we are massively bolstering our ability to take these actions where appropriate. So we're hoping that this speculation will achieve not only the crime reduction results that we're hoping, because first and foremost this is not an income generation tool. This is about dissuading criminals from committing crime in our community. It is the research shows that it's far more punitive than going to prison, because it takes the incentive out of crime. The vast majority of crime is motivated by financial gain. So if we take away that financial gain, and the criminals that we target know that if they commit crime, we're going to not only prosecute them and they potentially go to prison, but we will take their assets, we will take their houses, we will take their cars, we will take their cash that they made from their criminality away from them. So that really is our ambitions going forward. Just to cover the statutory function obligation in paragraph 12, it would be remiss of me to neglect to say this isn't a statutory function of Portsmouth City Council or regulatory services, but what I would say, and I say this from my experience not only over the last 10 years, but also as a board member for Trading Standards South East, where I work with the other 19 authorities in the South East and their heads of service, and I chair the South East focus group for financial investigators. There isn't a investigative team in the South East that doesn't have this function embedded in it now. So we wouldn't be fit for purpose to conduct the investigations that we need to do without having this capability. So it really isn't an option for me. Whilst it may not be a statutory function, we would be completely undermined if we didn't have the capability within-house. So with that in mind, I would ask the Cabinet Member if he would endorse the report and approve the recommendations as set out in paragraph 2, which are really to acknowledge the powers available to regulatory services and authorise their inclusion within council enforcement policy, and also to acknowledge the benefits this work has yielded since its implementation, approve of the manner in which we seek to deliver the function going forward, and also, I have not mentioned this today as yet, but also to approve the retention of the reserve account that we have. It's important that we have a reserve for this money than we claw back, because the Home Office dictate that we have to use it for certain things. So it's appropriate within the financial rules that we essentially ring fence it for that purpose. So that's why the reserve is there. And if there is any questions or anything you think I've missed,
Councillor
please.
Corkery.
Just a brief question on the reserve account that you referenced. What can that money be spent on?
The Home Office dictate there's a tiered approach. So the first thing it should be spent on, as far as the Home Office is concerned, is reinvested back into this activity to basically increase the capacity of the organisations that employ financial investigators. Now, as of 2006-2007, there are now about 25 public bodies that can employ financial investigators and use the Proceeds of Crime Act in this way. So it's not just the police, HMRC and those types of agencies that might naturally spring to mind. It can be the Environment Agency, it can be Royal Mail or the Post Office, it can be DEFRA, it can be local authorities. There is a wide list now of public agencies that have these powers. So first and foremost, it's to reinvest into that, and then it's about crime reduction functions. So that'll be enabling us other areas of the service, as long as it's got a crime reduction function. And right down the bottom of the list, I couldn't recite them all to you. I have to give you my apologies for that. But right down the bottom of the list, it's for like community projects. So, for instance, if we're an ambition of mine, for instance, and it always has been, is to get this work to the point where not only is it self-funding and has a decent pot, it's very sustainable, but also periodically we can go to boards like the Safer Portsmouth Partnership and offer a sum of money towards a community project that has a crime reduction dimension, like a community to help rejuvenate a community playground or something service that the community can access. So those are types of things that it's been used for anecdotally within other agencies, if that answers your question.
Yeah, that's useful to know, thank you. So apart from that, I don't think there's anything really to kind of disagree with or dispute within the report. I've said that I do think it's important to kind of bring these reports to public meetings, so I appreciate that has happened. I think it gives councillors and the public the opportunity to kind of find out more about what the council's doing in parts of the area of the kind of service that they may not be aware of before. So yeah, apart from that, I'm happy to know the report.
Yeah, I think that's great, and thank you again for all the work you do. And I think anybody who involves themselves in illegal tobacco trade, counterfeit goods, scams, and anything that involves criminal property should understand that in Portsmouth we will come after them, and we will seize their property, their homes, their cars, freeze their bank accounts wherever possible in order to get those assets and recover them under the Proceeds of Crime Act. And over the next 3 years, hopefully, with any more money that comes along, we will expand regulatory services to do even more of the work that you've just described to us, Ed. Okay, so that we're all behind you on that. So I'm very happy to approve the recommendations and accept the report. Thank you very much for everything you do. I've been on a hook all day.
Thank you very much, Councillor. This is the fourth report today from Regulatory Services. Members may recall that I sent prior to this meeting an idea of how many statutory functions we have in Regulatory Services, and it equates to around about 300. So you're quite fortunate only to have 4 in front of you today, perhaps. But this fourth report talks about the responsibilities placed upon Regulatory Services in respect to bivalve molluscs. Let me refer to them as shellfish from now on, if I may. There are 3 recommendations: to acknowledge our responsibilities, to recognise the importance of shellfish in our 2 harbours, and to approve the manner in which we carry out this function over the next 12 months. It is quite a detailed report. I know you've been here for quite some time, so I'll skip through the 4 most important areas. The first being our current responsibilities, which are set out in section 3. This details our regulation, and of course, no surprise, being regulatory services, we do what the regulations tell us. It also talks about the Shellfish Local Action Plan, which is an evolving process in which we communicate with the fishing industry. And it talks about the value in monetary terms of shellfish to the local fishing industry. It is quite difficult to put a pound sign on that. We last did some calculations 5 or so years ago, and we have around about 50 local registered fishermen on our books, which we communicate through the Shellfish Local Action Plan, and we equated the value to industry per annum at that time to around about £500,000. The second most important part is detailed in section 4, and it talks about the impact of shellfish upon pollution, or rather the reverse in this first case, the impact of pollution upon shellfish. It talks about the sanitary surveys, and there are surveys which are carried out, not regularly, the last one was carried out in 2013 with the Environment Agency, which details all of the pollution sources which are a potential to our 2 harbours. So we're not talking about only overflows and outfalls. There are many sources of pollution, and there is a link to those sanitary surveys at the back of the report. Those surveys dictate to us where we must sample the shellfish, so that is for a recommended monitoring point, and that is what we aim to do. So when we go into the last part of actually what we do, we have to do it in a particular process, and we have to try and target the area where the pollution is highest. So the samples that we obtain are the worst case scenario. So it's where those sources of pollution are deemed by the Environment Agency to have the greatest impact upon the species. I say species because you'll see from the table within the report there are a number of different species we target. It's not just oysters and clams, there are a number of others that we are interested in. Section 4 also talks about the classification. So once we have taken a sample, that sample is analysed in terms of its E. coli content and is classified in terms of a grading from A to P. So A is the highest level of classification. You'll see that we do not, from the table, we do not have any classified areas which are of that standard, A standard. Through to B and C and prohibited. Prohibited, of course, means that can be no fishing. I won't go through exactly what happens in a B and C because they are highlighted in the report. It's worth noting that we're unable to determine why shellfish changed their classification through that sampling program, through the analysis. But there are many possible reasons why. So it's very hard to say that if a particular discharge from an outfall has occurred, or a number of discharges, whether that is a direct result in the downgrade of the classification which has been highlighted in the table. But 3 beds have been downgraded in the last year from B to C, and that obviously has an impact upon what needs to happen to that shellfish after it's been caught. It has to go through a process of cleansing effectively. The third important point is in section 5, which is the impact of pollution, nitrate pollution on shellfish. And there is research, again it's not my research, it's not local authority research, but there is some research to say that nitrates are beneficial to shellfish, and that means effectively that shellfish will take those nitrates into their system and reduce the level of nitrates in our harbours. Of course, it depends upon the number of shellfish which are within the harbours to enable that process to take place. And I think it's fair to say from the research that's been carried out and detailed within the report that there is a reduction in the suitable habitat within the harbours to enable shellfish to grow in number. and therefore it's very hard to say exactly what the benefit of shellfish are in terms of nitrate reduction. And it's also noted within that section that successful restoration of the shellfish beds depends on very many environmental conditions. So the environment of that, those harbours needs to be better for the number of shellfish to multiply. Section 4 is the sampling plan for the next year, and effectively what we need to do is to go out into each harbour each month and harvest. We have the necessary authorities to do that, even though there are harvesting seasons where the fish shouldn't be collected. So we've got the necessary permissions to do that, and of course we will endeavour to take the number of samples which is required to secure the classification. So these rules are prescribed within regulation. If we are to continue to have a functioning harbour in terms of its shellfish production and quality, we need to go out into the harbours, each harbour, once a month. Obviously we have a boat and a fisherman, and we dredge the harbour bed and we collect the samples, and we will then take them for analysis, which will determine the classification. Whilst we go through that process, it's worth saying that we are checking on stock levels, and we're recording those collections. So how many fish we can collect in a certain dredge length will determine really the viability of those beds for economic value. If there is no economic value of those beds, then the responsibilities on the local authority no longer exist. So it's very important that we take some account of those stock levels. But that's it in a nutshell. That's the report itself, and obviously I'm looking for approval of the manner in which we carry out the sampling over the next 12 months. As with all the other reports, we have done an IIA and a financial analysis, and you will note, of course, that there is very little return here for the local authority in terms of the function that we're delivering. We are securing those beds in terms of their classification for the industry, and of course there is a potential conflict with regard to maintaining classification so that the industry can harvest the shellfish when we're talking about shellfish and the positive impacts they have on nitrate reduction. So there is a contradiction there, but we will continue with our sampling programme as there is a financial value, we believe, in the beds, at least for the 12 months, but we'll keep that under high regard.
Councillor Corkery.
Thank you. Section 5.4 talks about significant reductions in salt marsh in Portsmouth and Langston harbours over kind of previous decades. Do we know the reasons behind that, why they've reduced so much?
I don't know the reasons. I wasn't looking for the reasons in the report, just I was trying to give an idea of, if we're talking about restoring the beds, then obviously we need the correct environment for those beds to come back to life in quantity. So I wasn't looking for the reason why the level of salt marsh had been reduced, only that it has. That makes the replenishment of the shellfish within the harbours more difficult.
Okay, fair enough. I mean, I was just curious, to be honest, whether it was a result of human action or environmental change, or was it natural phenomenon, but no problem. Apart from that, yeah, I'm happy to note the report. Got no further comment.
So during our discussions, Mr. Lee, you've told me that, for example, I think it's something like 52 boats involved in fishing from around the region, not just in Portsmouth, but come here, but not full time. I think that's right. But they seem to be chasing fewer shellfish, because on one occasion you told me a dredge had been done. There was only 3 picked up in a 100-metre dredge. I think that's right, isn't it? Would that be it? They're chasing fewer shellfish, and more of those shellfish are now in category B, because there's no category A anywhere around Portsmouth. Is that about right?
It is indeed. I have made reference to the Southern Inshore Fishery Conservation Authority, Southern IFCA, and they exercise their powers with regard to the seasons which are available to fishermen to harvest. Obviously, they are a conservation authority, and it is right in saying that the harvest season has been reduced, and some fish you can't harvest because of the conservation nature of those rules and regulations. But there are we have about 50 vessels which we speak with, or masters of those vessels we speak with through the action plan. So we communicate when we have problems. We communicate, for example, when there have been discharges, and those discharges, they are reported widely, and they do get notified to the Food Standards Agency. And should the Food Standards Agency have a particular concern, then they will instruct us, because we are a responsible sort of authority of the Food Standards Agency. They will instruct us to report those issues to those fishermen and alert them and alert the merchants that we have in the area with regard to potential contamination of those fish and what extra measures they should put in play. But you're right in saying that the stock levels do seem to be in decline.
I'm not getting into politics of overfishing or anything like that, because that's for somebody else. Ours is simply the regulatory service to make sure that the fish that are caught, I think you told me that they can be caught, they have a certificate follows them, so you can trace them to any place where they are for sale because a certificate follows them. But one thing I did find interesting that you told me was that the nitrates go into the shell of the fish, and it locks the nitrates into the shell of the fish. So there is potential for the shellfish to help us beat the nitrates problem in the harbour, arguably if there was enough of them.
I would just agree with what you've just said, Councillor.
So the trick is to get someone to come clean up the harbour with a whole bunch of shellfish and ask people not to fish them too much. A bit like the cod wars, really. All right, well, it just describes, again, the amazing breadth of work that you all do, and I think the public should be reassured that we have such competent and hard-working officers and well-informed officers in regulatory services. And just as the last report, I'd just like to thank you all very much indeed for everything that you do, and really can't thank you enough, because sometimes you go way beyond, and we're just enormously grateful for all that you do for all of us here in Portsmouth. Okay, so, and I think that concludes the meeting. Did anybody else want to say anything? Well, thank you very much for coming, Marcella. I know you had a meeting with Ed during the week, which he tells me, briefed me just now, which he tells me was very constructive, and he's very pleased with it. So that's it. Thank you very much, and concludes the meeting.